Very pleased to welcome to the show Conservative MP for Crawley, Henry Smith. Thanks for joining us, Henry.
Hello, good afternoon, Kevin.
A bit worried about this barge. Now, with great respect for all the fire checks that must surely be done, I'm just starting to wonder, Henry, what the hell is going on with this barge? It docked on the 18th of July, the best part of 2 weeks ago. Before that, it was completely fitted out in Falmouth. In Cornwall. Before that, it was in Italy, and before that, it housed, with no problems at all, British construction workers in Holland for 2 years. So we need these checks, but, you know, are you beginning to smell a bit of a rat? This has taken too long. I'm just wondering if people who want to have open borders and admit everybody, every migrant that wants to come here, has somehow got their oar in here and prevented the opening of the Bibby Stockholm.
Well, I think you're right, and you described it in your opening segment as being the Blob acting again, and I suspect that's what's happening here, whether it be lawyers seeking to frustrate deportations of those people who shouldn't be here, or whether it be those who are responsible for local authorities trying to find fault as to why this floating barge, which, as you say, has been perfectly well used for British workers, in Italy as well, has been fully kitted out. Another excuse as to why it can't be used. I do smell a rat with all of this, and I'm afraid that we do have, in large part in the establishment, a real desire to have open borders and not to actually address the migrant crisis. Every time the government seeks to act on this, the civil service typically, but also activist lefty lawyers are always pushing back. But what I'd ultimately say is a barge is better than hotels, but we need to be stopping people being able to come to this country illegally in the first place. And that ultimately, I think, Kevin, means we need to leave the European Convention on Human Rights.
Well, I would agree with you entirely, but frankly, Henry, good luck with that, because I think that your government, the cabinet, are very committed to remaining in the European Commission on Human Rights. And as long as we do, you know, we're never going to get a plane off the ground to Rwanda or anything like that, are we?
Well, the Rwanda plan was first announced by Boris Johnson, very much supported that almost 18 months ago now. And as you say, unfortunately, not a single plane has left. And that is because you've got the likes of Keir Starmer and the mass ranks of Labour MPs and the Nationalist MPs who are voting consistently against legislation to make that happen in Parliament. And then you've got the, as I say, the activist lawyers who aren't actually personally affected by the mass wave of illegal migration, because it doesn't affect their well-off communities, who are seeking to make money out of this situation. And that's why we need to say, as a sovereign state, that we should be in control of our borders, recognise that the vast majority of people crossing the Channel are economic migrants. I don't blame anyone seeking a better life, but they need to do that through the proper channels. And this idea that we are not a haven for genuine refugees is absolute nonsense. We've got a long and proud track record of providing sanctuary to those who genuinely need it. These are typically young men. There aren't many women and children involved. And that's why we need to get real as a country. And I would advocate carving out that section of the European Convention on Human Rights. I think you're right. Sadly, I think that's going to be a bit of a long shot. But that ultimately is the only way that we're going to be able to address this crisis. Otherwise, we've been taken for fools.
The Bibby Stockholm can take 506. I heard it was 509, but it's above 500. As we just discussed, Henry, they're all going to be young males. That's the decision. Now, the people of Portland have been demonstrating about this. There's only 12,000 or so of them. They've got like one copper and, or one GP and a couple of coppers or something. They're a small community, and they say they cannot quite cope with the sudden arrival of 500, more than 500 young men with nothing to do all day. Don't forget, they're quite rightly allowed onto the dock. They're not actually prisoners, so they can go into town. The locals are very upset about this, and what makes their disquiet even more intense is the fact that they say they haven't been consulted, that no one consulted about this. This was a decision taken on high by the government and imposed on the local community. Your colleague, the local Tory MP, Richard Drax, has been very vocal on this. My question to you is that this is a source of concern because this isn't the only place this has happened. We've got the community up by RF Scrampton is desperately demonstrating to try and stop something like 4,000 migrants arriving in that disused airbase. There's a big campaign going on near Bexhill in Sussex where they're renovating a prison to put 1,500 or so migrants in. This is happening all over the country, and everywhere where these establishments arise, or in the case of the Bibby Stockholm dock, the local community say, this is just happening, no one is asking us anything about it, and we're not at all happy. It isn't a good situation, is it, Henry, that the government is imposing these asylum seeker centres on communities who just don't want them?
You're absolutely right, and it's unacceptable. It's an appalling situation where the views of local people are just ridden roughshod over. You mentioned my colleague Richard Drax, the local MP in Portland. I've had long conversations with him. He's absolutely furious at the way that he hasn't been properly kept informed of what's going to be happening to his community. And you're absolutely right, whether it's the ship at Portland or whether it's the use of former RAF bases or prisons, people are free to come and go who are housed in those facilities. And if they are in areas close to small towns, then the impact of 500, 1,000, 2,000 people and more on a local community is significant. And that's why we need to address the problem at source. Where do we stop with this? 50,000 people thereabouts in the last year who have entered the country via the illegal cross-channel route. That is the size of half a parliamentary constituency. It's unsustainable for us to be taking those sorts of numbers. I've got nothing against immigration, people who want to come here because they are going to be contributing to the economy. But these are people who are coming here typically, I'm afraid, to be looked after by our generous benefits system. And it's deeply unfair on British taxpayers. And it's a big security risk as well. There is no way that I'm convinced that those individuals in such large numbers can be properly screened to make sure that we aren't actually letting in through the back door some very dangerous people who mean this country harm.
Exactly. A couple of last questions, Henry. 198 migrants have been detected crossing the channel in the last 7 days. And we know that a couple of weeks ago we had this sort of second biggest number in a single day of something like 543, if I remember. So the point is they continue to come across. So the first tranche of my question is this. When will the illegal migration bill start to take some kind of effect? Because we can't have hundreds of migrants coming across if this bill is effective. Surely the bill should stop that kind of influx. Secondly, basically that's the question. When will they when will the legal migration bill start to take effect?
Well, the illegal migration bill passed all of its parliamentary stages, despite a lot of fierce opposition by Labour and Nationalist members of Parliament and unelected members of the House of Lords. It passed all of its stages earlier this month. I very much welcome that. But we need to start implementing it. But I think it needs to go farther still, because whilst people can claim that they're victims of modern slavery or that they are genuine asylum seekers, they get themselves then lost in the system. And during that, they have to be housed under the current legal arrangements. And the chance of ever removing them, I think, becomes very small indeed. So I welcome the illegal migration bill. I think the government have done the right thing in passing that, but we're going to have to go much further still. This is an unsustainable situation. You mentioned in one day over 500 people crossing the channel. Well, that's the barge filled up in one day.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not something that we can continue to countenance.
Absolutely. We've got to see some results fairly soon, because this is a very important issue to millions of people, and sometimes not yourself, possibly not even the Prime Minister, but sometimes you feel that some people in the Westminster bubble aren't quite getting that this is a very, very emotive issue for lots and lots of people in this country. And the government that can sort this out, Henry, in my view, is the government that will win the next election. I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you very much for your time. That's Henry Smith, Conservative MP for Crawley.